You're back at the Faculty Factory podcast, and I'm Kim Skorupski at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. It's a beautiful sunny day, and I'm looking at Dr. Laurence Boitet. Good morning, Laurence.
Good morning, Kim.
Dr. Laurence Marie Black Boitet. She is an assistant professor in two departments. The first is the Department of Medical Education in the Heersink School of Medicine, a secondary appointment in the Department of Cell, Developmental, and Integrative Biology, also in the Heersink School of Medicine. And she's the director of Biomedical Trainee Wellness. And that's how I met Dr. Boitet, because my friend and colleague, Dr. David Rogers, who's been on the podcast a couple of times at UAB, he is the chief wellness officer there. We've known each other a long time. And when I sent an email to him about, I was kind of curious about, I think it was scientist and physician scientist wellness programs, he said, you have to speak to Laurence. And so that's how I met her and then learned about all the cool things happening at UAB. And here she is. And there's going to be a great conversation today. I just know it. And it is all about how to lead science well. What is that, Laurence? Welcome to the podcast. Tell us about how we lead science well.
Oh my goodness. Well, leading science well, something that we aspire to do, I think, across all of these leadership positions in science. I want to take you back for a second into my postdoc that I did with David Rogers, where I started this little exploration into the well-being of the scientist workforce. But previously our office was really focused on healthcare, and I'm a basic scientist by training. My PhD is in cell biology. I did this great postdoc in organizational behavior to try to go from being a scientist to studying them. And one of the first papers that I published with David, we really looked at that non-clinician biomedical researcher well-being. And we saw that, 44% of them had this really high distress level, which is, associated with increased risk of suicidal ideation, turnover, reduced quality of life, and all these things. And our analysis really showed that some of the major correlates of distress were all organizationally derived. So heavy workloads, a low perception of organizational support, lack of trust in supervisors, and these things. And this workforce just seemed like they needed some attention, some help. So we ended up designing this intervention. That thing about low perception of organizational support, wouldn't it be great if the Office of Wellness actually invested in their development? That was one of the things we were reading in our qualitative data, that, they felt like there was no investment in their growth, and just foster better environments where better innovation can grow.
Wow. Dr. Boitet, this is so exciting. I can't wait to hear all the nitty-gritty of it. When you said 44% of the faculty reported distrust or distress?
Distress.
Distress. And that's so, as you started talking, I thought, she said distress.
Mm-hmm.
Distress, but I heard distrust, distrust. And I've just kind of had this light bulb like, wow, they're probably similar. That when we are in distress, the opposite of, I'm thinking, eustress, EU stress, like highs, and opposite distressed, comes from this root of being distrustful or not believing in the honesty of another, or in this instance, you said organizationally driven. I don't trust my organization to care about me or care for me. So I'm just wanted to share that I had a little kind of synonym revelation here with distrust and distress. How do those kind of overlap? And so anyway, that's a side conversation. Maybe we'll get to that later, because I think it's fascinating how our distress can be rooted in distrust, vice versa. But anyway, let's hear about this 8-week asynchronous program that it sounds like you built with your faculty in mind, and collaborating with them on the topics that they felt that they needed for growth and development. So tell us all about it, please.
Yeah. So this 8-week curriculum, I'm a researcher at heart. So, we want to know if this intervention not only is acceptable and feasible in this population, but also is doing what we want it to do. So in their first module, They're coming in, they're taking a pre-assessment. At the end of the intervention, they're taking a post-assessment, and then we follow them longitudinally. But essentially what they do is they learn about empowering leadership. So these 4 fundamentals: empowering leader behaviors, I'm fostering participation in decision-making. I'm expressing confidence in my team members. I'm providing autonomy for their work. I'm trying to go out of my way to enhance meaningfulness in their work, connecting what they're doing to the bigger picture, right? And all of these things are so easy to do in lab teams because they're so stable and interdependent and bounded, those 3 criteria of a real team. And so throughout this curriculum, we know that scientists are so busy. So throughout this curriculum, they come in and they watch 10-minute max little educational video, and they do what I refer to as in the field activities. So for example, in one of the modules, they learn about empowering leadership, what it is, and then their activity is to go into their team and ask their team members, hey, this is the empowering leadership framework. Let me tell you about it. What are the things that I'm doing that already naturally align with this framework? And what are the things that I'm not doing that I can do better? And then they come back and they write a reflection on it. And it's so uncomfortable because off the bat, we're asking these leaders to go get feedback, right, about what they're doing in real time. But I promise you, no exaggeration, 100% of the time, they're like, oh, wow, this was actually a really fantastic experience. And throughout the course, they're learning about job crafting. So saying, this is my overall, purpose for my lab, for my research program. These are the challenging demands that are going to help us get there. These are the hindering demands that we have that are kind of getting in the way. And then these are our structural or, our structural resources or the resources that our organization can give us, and our social resources, like our network, that can help us get there too. And they do this really cool activity where they're saying, all right, if I have hindering demands, how am I going to eliminate, delegate, or reframe them? How can I share responsibilities across my team? What are my team members identifying as hindering demands versus challenging demands? Are there ways that they can trade tasks with each other, right? My hindering demand could be somebody else's challenging demand. I'm really making that optimal work. When I talk to people about this, saying, these scientists, you think of work as pushing an object up an inclined plane, right? And that friction force acting against you, and saying these hindering demands are that friction force. How can we get you into this plane that has no friction, that's just easily operating, so we can do our best work, getting the most meaning out of it, being as creative as possible, and things like that. And by the end of it, these leaders, their feedback is always like, wow, we're actually operating better because everybody's happier, because they're able to learn and grow and change and really operate within their expertise and their interests and their passions versus being told what to do. But anyway, go down a rabbit hole because I get so excited about talking about it. But throughout the curriculum, we're not only asking the leaders, these different psychometrics, trying to evaluate their work engagement and the meaning they derive from their work and their well-being, but we're also asking the team members too, to say, your leader, thinks they're going empowering leadership, but are they actually? Is the increase in your leaders' leadership behaviors, is it impacting your work engagement and your well-being and the meaning you're deriving from work and your ability to job craft as well? And it's just been a really incredible experience. We were nervous releasing it during 2025 when we have all of these different things happening with funding. But I think it's been a hidden strength, giving these people an opportunity to come together and talk. We have these weekly sessions. We serve as office hours called Continuing the Conversation, where they can come and talk and brainstorm, and problem solve with each other across disciplines, across institutions, across parts of the country. It's been a really empowering experience for all of us.
And I just kind of want to circle back to people who are like in the car right now or walking the dog, and they're thinking, wait a minute, I heard an empowering leadership framework. I heard about lab teams. I heard about these constructs like eliminate, delegate, reframe, hindering or challenging demands. There's so much here. I'm hoping, can we circle back a little bit, and can you describe the empowering leadership framework?
Yes, absolutely. So essentially in empowering leadership, it's built on this idea, the foundational leadership competencies, like, inspiring a shared vision, for instance. But really this idea of, when I think of an empowering leader, I think of a leader who's really in the trenches with their team. So it's not somebody who is, above them telling them what to do, but more, my friend Dominique wrote this book that I really love, talking about how the best leaders are in the pack, right? And that's the idea of empowering leadership, fostering decision or participation in decision making, saying, I'm going to make a decision about what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and what you're doing within your role, but then having the courage, but also the empathy and the compassion to say, but I don't know really what you do on a granular level. So if I need to make a decision regarding your work, I'm going to make it with you in the room, and I'm going to hear your opinion. I'm going to hear what your experience is, and then I'm going to take that information so I can make the best possible decision for the entire team. The idea of asking your team to do something difficult, something challenging, but making sure that those demands are balanced with the appropriate resources so they're able to achieve that, but that you're still pushing them outside of their comfort zone, right? And giving them feedback that's balanced, saying these are the things that you're doing super well, super gifted, all of these things, and these are the things that we can work on to continuously improve, because science, you're never done learning ever. So really expressing that confidence, really hitting on that basic psychological need of competence in terms of enhancing meaningfulness in work, that idea of inspiring a shared vision, saying we're not just in here, pipetting little tiny amounts of fluid into little tiny tubes on a day-to-day basis. We are doing these specific experiments so we can build this knowledge, so we can help this patient population with this particular disease, and reminding the team of that, because science can get so hard and you're asking these impossible questions about nature and then trying to be the only one in the world who knows the answer. And that's hard, and that can be demotivating. But saying like, yeah, this is hard, but guess what? It means something. It contributes to the bigger picture, and always reminding them of that shared vision. And then again, providing autonomy for work. I talked about basic psychological need of competence, basic psychological need of autonomy, saying that giving your team the ability to say, you know, I can do this independently. I think I have the resources and the skills to do this independently. But then also on the other side of things, hey, I need a little bit less autonomy in this space. I need a little bit more help doing these things. But really, all of that significantly impacting their engagement in the work and their commitment to the team and their retention, which, can be difficult. And really the positive experience. When we think about careers, especially in science, I like to think about them as vocations, right? Being able to live out your values. If you really value creativity and collaboration and exploration and all of these things, find that out about your team. That's what empowering leadership is all about. What are your values? How do they fit with our team? And how can we use your gifts and strengths to really get to where we're going collectively, not this idea of competition, and all of that.
Sounds like it's got some elements of self-determination theory,
Absolutely.
autonomy and belonging and competence.
Mhm.
I'm also hoping, Dr. Boytet, we can go back to this. You said every experience over this 8-week curriculum starts with a 10-minute, watching a 10-minute vid. Is it a YouTube? What are these 10 minutes? Did you create them? You produced them? What are these 10-minute snippets that you're watching? And then I want to hear more about the in the field activities. You mentioned one, but could you describe how the operation of that works? Does everyone show up to the session, you hit go on the thing, and they watch the 10-minute video, then you're like, okay, everybody, run on back to your labs. And then they do the thing, and then you all sit there and wait, playing elevator music, and then they come back. I mean, how does that operationally happen?
That would be great if that was the reality. So actually, if I think about it, I think there's only 4 videos, and then out of the 8 modules, and the rest of them are just activities. The videos are just recorded PowerPoints by our friend David Rogers.
Oh,
I think
David.
yeah, I think it's really cool that these people from all over UAB, really, we have seven participating institutions so far, that they get to sit down and listen to David's wisdom, which is probably my favorite thing in the whole world. And yeah, so it's about 10 minutes of that for about 4 of those modules. And then, for example, when we learn about empowering leadership, it's asynchronous, so it's all online. So then they can move straight into the activity. So, the first activity being empowering leader experiences. So, hey, you just learned about empowering leadership. What is your experience with empowering leadership? Have you ever worked with an empowering leader? How did that make you feel? If you ever not worked with an empowering leader, how did that make you feel? And what does that tell you about your experience and your growth and your leadership journey? Other activities, what I'd already discussed, the team member discussion. So, hey, this is empowering leadership. Please give me some feedback about what I'm doing, if I can do it better. When in module 4, they learn about job crafting. So, really going into that, you know, where are you going? Let's do this assessment of a challenging demand or that thing that's super hard. But once you overcome it, you're just going at light speed into the right direction. What is a hindering demand and what do you do with those? What are your resources that you have? And then this math equation, not literally, but this idea of, okay, these are all my demands. What are the resources at my disposal? What are the ones that I need? And how can I balance that, not just for me, but also for my team? And then going in and doing that job crafting activity as the in the field activity. So to answer your question about are they playing elevator music and running out into their labs and doing that thing, they have a week to do it. So they can watch the video on Monday and then take the rest of the week until Sunday to do the activity. That's what we're trying to really convey to them. Like, we think this is important to you, but we also know that you have absolutely no time for this. So how can we make it so you can do it on your own time? I don't publicize this when we're actually recruiting, but we actually leave the course open 3 weeks longer after the end date to give people, because things come up, grant deadlines, paper deadlines, illnesses, things like that. So giving them 3 extra weeks because we think giving them a little bit extra time to actually go and do it, not in a rush, but with intention, actually helps them. And also, I think, communicates to them, hey, we think this is important and we think you're important. So we're going to give you a little bit of leniency.
And then the group comes back and does a communal debrief so they hear each other's experiences.
Every week, Friday at noon, we hop on Zoom all together. So it's really great. We have people from Tulane and, Auburn, UAB, University of Michigan, coming together and saying, this is what I learned this week, or this is a hindering demand that I identified, but I'm not sure what to do about it. And having voices from all different levels and experiences coming to help them problem solve. We have one module that I also really love called Challenges in Enacting Empowering Leadership. Right. What are the organizational challenges that you have that might be hindering for you to be able to be an empowering leader? Right. And then talking about it and saying, oh, actually, we all have kind of the same things. How can we get together and brainstorm about how to get around that? I also want to mention, too, that, we initially designed this with faculty in mind, but then thinking about my own experiences in the research space, there's more than just the faculty who's the leader in these different situations. So we really opened it up to say, the inclusion criteria being, you are a leader not of, but in a clinical or biomedical research space who has at least 2 people that report to you, where you also are in charge of either the administrative and or financial aspects of the lab. And we cast it out there, not necessarily knowing what types of job titles we would get, but getting lab managers, laboratory supervisors, clinical research coordinators, nurse clinical research coordinators, assistant, associate, full professor, staff scientists, like all different types of people really flocking to this, which I think is really interesting, but also important just to recognize that, yeah, faculty are leaders, but also there are these other wonderful people in this space who are really in the trenches every day leading people as well, who are also worthy of being developed and moving into that next phase of their positions as well.
This is just extraordinary. Congratulations on building such a thoughtful leadership program rooted in the concept of wellness and and how that came about from recognizing faculty in distress. And that's what I really appreciate about your program. What I've seen over the years of doing leadership programming, back at Rush and at Hopkins and now here, is people look at the current leaders and go, ew, they're all ew. All ew, David. I would never want that job.
Mhm.
I don't want to be what he's being. I don't want her life without recognizing or really understanding these elements of leadership, or as you're saying, empowering leadership, thinking that somehow people just either born leaders or they have the special hookup and they're just kind of coasting through. But actually, many of these qualities are learned skills and behaviors. And for many faculty, I've noticed, Laurence, it's not an on-off switch. It's not like, oh, you're terrible and you need to stop doing this and start doing that. Rather, everybody in this space is successful and really gifted and talented at something, obviously, doing great work in science and biomed and patient care and education. It's oftentimes can be a dimmer switch where you just need to dial that up a little bit more, dial that down, and push that lever down just a little bit to dim that. And just having this insight into, oh my gosh, yeah, confidence, autonomy, meaning, that stuff matters. Yeah, just kind of bringing that to the consciousness can
Mhm.
really grow that confidence and help identify those stressors in an organization where there's opportunity to help colleagues and learners and patients in an organization. We think,
Mhm.
I can't do anything. I don't have that fancy role, but we can have a greater awareness of opportunities.
When you talk about, these are things that you can use in a leadership position, but not, I mean, job crafting is something you can use every year in a performance review. Saying, this is what we're doing together as a team. Here's, your task list, or here's my task list, and here's, this negotiation that I want to do to say, if this is what you're wanting me to do as an employee, here's, what I think I need to do to get there. And here's the stuff that I think is really standing in the way. And again, here's the resources that I need to get that done, and really creating that plan for the next year with so much intention. Again, speaking to that bigger picture. It's something that I do on a daily basis, right? I think demands and resources balance activity happens every morning when I write down my to-do list. Right? What are the demands on my time, my, ability to use my brain today, and what are the tasks that I can fit in order to, get the most efficient, effective, and high level work done that I can with the resources that I have in that particular period. We also talk about in one of the first modules of Leading Science Well, all the different types of leadership, because empowering leadership is great. But there are some studies that show that it's not always the best, right? In times of crisis, if the lab's on fire, the PI isn't like, so everybody, let's huddle up. How best can we put out this fire? How can we use our skills to do that? No, you go into a directive leadership, framework saying, okay, here's what's happening, this, and this. So being able to say, I'm aspiring towards empowering leadership in these situations, but I'm also knowledgeable in transactional, transformational, aversive, directive, all of compassionate, all of these different types of leadership skills and frameworks that we can use and kind of navigate with through our different experiences. Because one of the big topics that we have, and one of the questions that we get every single time we do this offering, somebody says, well, what if I have a team member who doesn't want to be empowered? Right. And so we
Ooh,
say, right,
yeah.
it's
Yep.
about knowing these people, right? And knowing what motivates them. We talk about self-determination theory. It's my favorite theory on earth, to say that what's important is intrinsic motivation, right? That we understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because when we have those relatedness, competence, and autonomy needs satisfied, we're better able to access that intrinsic motivation. So from my point of view, being a leader is about knowing your people, knowing their strengths and knowing their gifts and knowing how they fit into what you're trying to do, and trying to motivate them in a way that really speaks to them, to get them all rallied behind this bigger
Mhm.
picture mission. I think
Mm.
that's what's beautiful about leadership, is we shy away from it because we think it's ugly and all of these things. But if it's done with an intention, and we're in a space or an environment or an organization that really lets us do it properly, it can be a really, really amazing experience where, my hope for my trainees is that, they see David or they see me and they say like, wow, I wasn't really thinking about academia, but actually now I am because
Mhm.
I've had these really positive experiences. I've had an empowering leader and I know how to do that.
Could you reflect on your experience in the Leading Science Well program? And do you remember or can you share any experience of one of your participants who, after going back in one of those in the field activities and asked their lab or their team, hey, how am I doing on this? Or how are we doing there? And they learned something, came back and shared it. I mean, I know that happens all the
Mhm.
time, the big aha. And can you reflect on a change that one of those participants made and that you learned of, wow, that little pivot, that recalibration, that, as I was saying, like a dimmer switch, or maybe it was a big change. I don't know. Does a story come to mind that you can share with us how that insight and that purposeful living and intentionality did result in measurable change?
Mhm. So it's funny you say that. It reminds me of this time. Um, there was this junior faculty. I think it's funny because her experience was similar to mine. You watch these leaders come into these positions and you think you come into this leadership position and you're just supposed to come and tell people what to do, essentially, and just drive the ship. And she was talking about empowering leadership, and she was like, I completely forgot that these are, I mean, I don't want to throw her under the bus, but like these are people who have lives and aspirations and things like that. So being able to go into her team and say, this person is a lab technician, but eventually wants to be a lab manager. Oh, that opens up a lot of different things that I can teach her to help her get where she's going. That will also actually help me get where I'm going, like learning how to develop a budget, learning the purchasing and ordering system, learning how to do inventories, giving them leadership opportunities so they can lead the lab. It becomes just more of a collaborative movement in the lab and saying like, oh, actually the epiphany being it's not my job to come in and tell people what to do, but it's my job to help people understand what we're doing together. And I think that's one of the most beautiful realizations that you can have to say like, no, actually they might, be a technician on paper, but they also have this amazing, all these amazing experiences inside and outside of the lab, that actually can help them help you go where you're going. So taking that time to say, hey, how are you? What are you interested in? And how can we use those talents and gifts to actually create something really inspiring here?
You're so right, Lawrence, because you're making this is such a simple but profound observation you just kind of brought to my brain is that being a leader is not telling people what to do
Right.
because they know what to do.
Hmm.
Because they applied for the job, they read the job description, they're in the space, they're doing the pipetting. They're like, I know what my job is. I didn't pull into the parking garage this morning and go, wonder what I'm going to be doing today. Everybody knows. I know what my job is. I don't need you to tell me to go open up, lane 5 and get the cash register ready to go. I do that every day. I don't
Right.
need you to tell me how to do my job. Rather, reminding me why lane 5 needs to be opened and I'm the cashier here and why we're here. It's not about checking people out of the grocery store only. It's building relationships. It's being in community. It's caring. It's noticing. It's all these bigger things. How do we motivate other people, Lawrence? Because I've heard you say motivation, motivation. It just reminded me of a question one of my colleagues is like, oh, my team, it just isn't motivated, Kim. How do I motivate them?
Hmm. Yeah, and I kind of want to like go back a little bit before I get to the $1 million question, how do we motivate humans, right? And say, when you're talking about all of these different things, David Rogers talks about it a lot. No matter where you are in healthcare in the academic medical center, like you're in healthcare. All right, so wouldn't it be a beautiful world if organizations would go to our EVS workers and say, you are in healthcare. What you are doing is important. If you don't do this job, all of these things will fall apart. Like you are important in this. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do as leaders is remind people that they're important. The second thing that I was thinking about And your reflection is this idea of like the iceberg model, right? Like we're all so much more than what's above the surface. So going in and saying like your job title is this, but you have all of these gifts that we can leverage. And with that, connecting you, like who you are as a person to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Like it can be a really beautiful experience if you take the time to actually get to know the people. So in terms of motivating people, I think it's important at the very basics to learn that, there are people who work to live and there are people who live to work. And both of those things are incredibly valid, right? Whether you're working really, really hard so you can get a paycheck, so you can do the things outside of work that you love to do, or provide for your family, or access that meaning that you're deriving from your life. Or if, I identify as this person, I live to work. I love my job. I love everything that I do because I'm able to put my strengths and my gifts into all of these different things. But as leaders, really understanding those motivating factors and those strengths and those gifts. And I want to brag on my one of my doctoral students. Her name is Petra. She's leading the study right now where we're looking at meaningful work in healthcare teams. We asked the entire medical enterprise to describe their culture at work, which elicited
One
a lot.
word, like word cloud, or like a sentence and
A
paragraph?
narrative, just
Oh,
describe
wow.
it.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was incredibly interesting to read and do a qualitative analysis of that. But at the end of that analysis, we separated them by whether that not they had or were engaged in meaningful work. So we have a bucket of people who say the work I do is meaningful to me, and we have a bucket of people who say the work that I do is not meaningful to me. And there are significant differences in their experience of culture at work, and it's fascinating. And just when we have the people who are engaged in meaningful work, they're viewing their culture in a more positive light. They're looking at those more, positive attributes of things. They have more attentional bias towards the positive stimuli in what's happening. They're able to recognize negative aspects of the organization, but they're more likely to reframe them. Saying, I have to see this number of patients every day, and it's, really grinding, but this is what I do. And this is why I do it. And this is why I'm in healthcare. And it's so beautiful. Then you look at the responses from the people who don't have meaning in their work. And there's, saying that they're not recognized enough. We're talking about self-determination theory, the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. I have a hunch that these people are extrinsically motivated, right? I need that recognition to feel like what I'm doing is meaningful versus deriving meaning out of the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. The people with low meaningful work are also more likely to point at other people, saying, oh, it's my leader's problem. The leader is the bad person. My organization is what's wrong with this place. And they're also more likely to catastrophize, right? Saying, our workforce is hemorrhaging. We're going down like the sinking Titanic, like all these very emotive, descriptive things. And just really this, the take-home message to organizations saying, we're bringing all of these very intrinsically motivated people who want to change the world, right? They want to change the disease state. They want to help this patient population. And we're putting them into these very transactional, metric-driven environments, saying, we want you to be innovative and creative and curious and all of these things, but you have to publish in these types of journals and get all of these grants and all of these things to keep your job. And it's this, headbutting of, I'm an intrinsically motivated person in an extrinsically oriented organization.
Mm.
It, how do you sustain or give these people access to that meaningful work so you're speaking to their intrinsic motivation? Because what the study is showing is that's worth it. They're less likely to turn over. They're more likely to have organizational pride and satisfaction, right? How do you keep those people? But then at the end of the day, also, how do you have a very metrically, financially focused environment? But that's the question we have for the organizations, right? Realize who you're trying to recruit. And if you're not going to budge from that, those extrinsic motivators, then are you okay with these people having this? Okay, I guess I'm either going to have to change the way I'm motivated, or I'm going to go find an organization that actually speaks to my value system. And you have to be okay with that. But really thinking about, what you're doing as a leader, as an organization, as a team member, and how, through that more, hidden, I would say hidden curriculum, but, those hidden messages, what are you communicating? If I'm telling you need to publish, 5 papers every year and always have a grant and always do these things, but also be creative. Are you giving them the resources to actually accomplish those things? Are you setting them up for a more impossible task?
And can you really schedule creativity? Can you actually put it on a calendar, like a patient encounter or a class you're teaching or an administrative meeting? Be creative from 9:05 to 10:55 on Tuesdays.
Right.
That's yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Be creative. Now, it doesn't happen that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my question is like, okay, how do we measure that? There's got to be a way to measure the more positive, more meaningful aspects of our work. Is it through a measure of meaning in work? Is it, a readout of job satisfaction, work engagement? Because if you're in meetings 9 to 5 every day,
Right.
where's the
And then you have to
meaning?
go home and it's pajama time.
Mhm.
It's hard to, and then you have, by the way, maybe have a life and maybe you have a family and maybe you have friends and maybe you have avocations and maybe you like to eat periodically and sleep
Sleep.
and exercise. Maybe. I mean, how do you integrate that? That is the question.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
very definitely an existential question for organizations, for leaders, for faculty members, for staff, for all of us, trying to find that meaning in the madness, meaning in all the noise. Like, where is the meaning? And
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book called Beyond Happiness by Jen Lim. And one of my favorite quotes from that book is happy people bring the biggest profits, right?
mm,
She talks a lot about ROI, but not that return on investment, but the ripple of impact, right? What are we doing, to make our people happy, right? Like we're not going to be creative, innovative all day long, every single day, but meeting people where they are, because at the end of the day, if you're actually going in and asking, how are you? And you're caring, that person is also going to be more motivated to really show up for you
yeah,
at the end of the day. Um, I think this really important just to remember humanity. And when we talk about job crafting, that's my favorite question to ask is like, if you won the lottery tomorrow, what are you doing? Are you quitting your job? If you have the ability to keep certain aspects of your job, what are they? And if you want to quit your job, let's have a conversation, right? Where can we get you into a vocation? Because when you do the math and you count up how many hours you're spending away from your family every week, don't do it. I've done it. You cry.
yeah.
Right. And
Oh,
that was one of the biggest impetuses for me for switching from biomedical research into organizational behavior because I was like, I love asking hard questions and getting the answers and being the one person who knows that answer. But at the end of the day, I had this double-edged sword of having my first child during COVID. And I remember being up at 3 in the morning, writing a grant, looking at my newborn baby next to my bed and saying, oh my gosh, this grant is going to lead to more papers, going to lead to more grants, going to lead to more 3 a.m.s, more 60-hour work weeks. If I'm going to spend time away from this precious little thing that I have, I want to make it worth it, right? I want to use my gifts and my talents and my strengths to do something with intention. So when I come home, I can say, I spent 8 hours away from you, but I did this and I helped these people. And that's super important to me. And David really makes that possible. Like, let's be honest. He's really been the gift to also not only allow me to do that type of work, um, but also remind me, because I get stuck in the grind too, to pull me up for air and say, hey, what are you doing? What are we doing? How can we rearrange what you're doing to get back on track so you're well? Because he recognizes, as just the most empowering leader that I know, if I'm not my best, my work's not going to be my best. So it's really important to, make sure my cup is full so I have things to pour out of it, right?
Lawrence, I'm so afraid that everyone's going to want to go to work at UAB.
Come on.
So if you want to work with Dr. David Rogers and Dr. Laurence Boitet at UAB, you can email Lawrence at lmblac at uab.edu. I'm kidding, but not kidding. This is how great David is. And I'm so appreciative that he introduced me to you, Laurence. This has been a wonderful time together. I feel like I could talk with you for a couple more hours and learn so much. I hope you come back to the Faculty Factory podcast.
Of course.
Friends on the podcast, go to facultyfactory.org. Laurence is going to send some links to papers or the program, to her website, to all the materials that you might be interested in. We'll have it there. Facultyfactory.org does have lots of resources itself. There's faculty development resource links, so maybe whatever she sends me, I'll post it there on the link. Lots of things, so much stuff here. Dr. Boitet, thank you. You've shared so much information that really, I think, is going to change a lot of people's lives, and I really appreciate what you're doing at UAB and how you share it around the country and now around the world on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's just so much fun to talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Faculty Factory podcast. We are a faculty development community sharing tools to build academic leaders in healthcare. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast? Please visit facultyfactory.org/contact and send me a message there. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas.